everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We're going to be getting into slashers today.
Ooh, fun.
But not the typical stuff you might be thinking of. We've got a whole stack of research and articles here.
Yes.
And it turns out there's way more to these movies than just, blood and guts.
Yeah, a lot more going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
A lot of really fascinating themes that don't get enough attention.
Exactly. That's what we're going to dig into today.
Yeah.
So get ready to maybe see slashers in a whole new light.
I think you will.
Awesome. Okay, so, there's that stereotype that slashers are all about just mindless violence.
Right.
But what if I told you that, one of the most fascinating parts, and one that often gets overlooked, is the psychology of the killer?
Oh, absolutely.
What do you think about that? Does understanding their backstory make them more frightening, or does it kind of humanize them in a weird way?
That's such a good question. And it's something that a lot of our sources really get into. And one of the takeaways is that the really good slasher films, the ones that are really compelling, go beyond that surface level.
Right.
They actually take the time to explore the killer's psyche. And reveal the events, the traumas, whatever it might be that shape them into who they are.
Okay.
And it's not about excusing what they do, obviously.
Right.
It's more about providing a deeper understanding of wow, what could lead someone
The why.
to become a killer.
The why not, just the how.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The motivation.
Because I'll admit, some of my favorite horror villains are the ones that have those really complex backstories. It makes them so much more interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some great examples of that in the slasher genre.
Okay, tell me more.
One that comes to mind is Maniac from 1980.
Okay.
Have you seen that one?
I haven't, but I've heard of it.
Okay, so it's shot entirely from the killer's perspective.
Oh, wow.
So you're right there in his head experiencing his reality.
Oh, that's creepy.
It's really disturbing.
Okay.
And you see his loneliness, his inability to connect with people, and it shows the way that he perceives women, which is really disturbing.
Wow.
And it uses all these techniques like unsettling close-ups and this kind of grainy, dreamlike visual style and voiceover narration to create this really disturbing portrait of his mental state.
So it's almost like the film techniques themselves are part of revealing the killer's psychology.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a really important point. The way a film is shot, edited, the music, all of that can have a huge impact on how we perceive the characters.
Right.
Another film that does this really well is Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon from 2006.
I haven't heard of that one.
Oh, it's so good. It's a mockumentary that follows an aspiring slasher villain as he's preparing for his big killing spree.
Interesting. So is it played for laughs or is it serious?
It's actually a really clever blend of both.
Okay.
It deconstructs all those slasher tropes in a really funny way, but it also has this chilling look at the psychology of a killer.
Okay.
So, for example, Leslie Vernon, meticulously studies past slasher films.
Oh, wow.
He analyzes their techniques. He's thinking about traps, how to choose his victims.
He's doing his research.
He's doing his research. And even how to craft his look.
Oh, interesting.
So by making it all so deliberate, it makes you think about all the choices that go into creating a slasher villain.
Yeah, it's like the film is making a commentary on the genre itself.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's what makes these films so effective. They make you think critically about the genre while still delivering all the, thrills and chills.
Right, they're not just mindless entertainment.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the psychology of the killer, but what about slasher films as social commentary? Is that something our sources talk about?
They do.
Because, to be honest, I don't usually think of slashers as having, deep messages or anything.
You might be surprised.
Okay.
A lot of them actually weave in some pretty insightful social commentary. Really?
Yeah, and they often use the conventions of the genre to explore real-world issues. One example that comes up is Candyman.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that one.
1992.
Yeah.
It tackles themes of racial inequality, urban legends, the cyclical nature of violence.
Wow.
And it uses the setting of the Cabrini Green housing project in Chicago to highlight the social and economic disparities that contribute to these cycles of poverty and violence.
That's a really powerful example.
You did.
So it's showing how a horror film can be entertaining, but also make you think about important issues.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to race and class.
Okay.
The Purge franchise, which started in 2013, uses extreme violence to comment on things like social unrest, political extremism, the erosion of morality.
It's like a dark reflection of society.
It is, very much so.
Yeah.
It's a brutal commentary for sure, but it definitely makes you think.
So using horror to hold up a mirror to society.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that our sources suggest this potential is still largely untapped. Like, think about it. You could have a slasher film about social media addiction.
Ooh.
Where the killer is stalking victims through their online profiles.
That's creepy.
Or a climate change slasher.
Okay.
Where the environment itself becomes the antagonist.
Wow.
Like, what kind of contemporary fears could be explored through the slasher genre?
So many. Like, imagine a film about data privacy.
Oh, yeah.
Where the killer uses someone's stolen info to, like, manipulate and terrorize them.
That's scary.
Or a slasher about AI.
Ooh.
Where, like, a harmless AI assistant turns deadly.
Right? That's terrifying.
It really shows how the genre can adapt to reflect our anxieties.
Okay, so now I want to talk about those movies where the final girl fights back.
Oh, yes.
She becomes the hunter.
Love those.
I love those too.
So satisfying.
It's so sad.
To see the victim turn the tables.
Yes.
Like it flips the whole slasher formula on its head. Exactly. And our sources highlight a couple of films that do this really well.
Oh, yeah, like what?
One is You're Next from 2011.
Okay.
And it features this final girl named Erin.
Okay.
And she's like super resourceful. She uses booby traps and weapons, and she just outsmarts her attackers.
So she's not just surviving, she's like taking charge.
Yes, exactly.
I love that.
It's awesome.
It's a really empowering take on the final girl.
Yes.
Another great one is Hush from 2016.
Okay.
It's about a deaf writer who has to outsmart a masked killer who breaks into her home.
Oh, wow.
And the film uses sound design in such a clever way to heighten the tension and put you right in her shoes.
Oh, that's interesting. So what do you think makes a good hunter becomes the hunted story?
Well, the protagonist has to be intelligent and resourceful.
Right.
They can't just be lucky.
Yeah.
They have to outsmart the killer.
It's all about the strategy.
Yeah. And the film has to build suspense, keep you guessing who's going to win.
Right, like you're on the edge of your seat the whole time. Okay, speaking of subverting expectations, let's talk about supernatural elements in slashers.
Ooh, yeah.
This is where it gets really interesting because adding that supernatural twist can create a whole other level of fear.
Right, because you don't know what the rules are anymore.
Exactly.
Anything can happen.
And one of the most iconic examples of this is...
Let me guess.
A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Of course. Freddy Krueger.
Freddy Krueger.
The ultimate.
He's terrifying.
Yeah, he's like a slasher villain and a supernatural entity all in one.
Right.
He can get you in your dreams. He can manipulate reality.
Oh, it's so creepy.
It's like you're not even safe in your own mind.
Exactly. So it's not just the physical threat, but the psychological terror, too.
And what's so effective about him is that he represents our deepest fears, you know?
Yeah.
He's a manifestation of our nightmares.
But the ultimate boogeyman.
Yes.
Okay, so are there any other slasher films that blend the supernatural and the slasher elements really well?
There are a few that come to mind. One is The Burning Moon from 1992. It's a German film.
Okay.
It's pretty obscure, but it has a vengeful spirit, witchcraft, really gruesome imagery.
Oh, wow.
It's definitely not for the faint of heart.
Okay. I'm adding that to my watch list.
But it just goes to show you there's so much potential for exploring different kinds of supernatural threats.
Right. You could have ancient folklore, vengeful spirits, interdimensional beings.
Oh, yeah. The possibilities are endless.
So creepy. But let's shift gears now and talk about a more grounded setting.
Oh.
The creepy small town.
Oh, yeah. Classic.
There's something so unsettling about small towns and horror films.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's the isolation. The close-knit community. It feels like everyone knows everyone's business.
Right.
And that creates this sense of claustrophobia and paranoia.
It's like the perfect setting for a slasher.
It is, and our sources talk about how this setting taps into our fears about the unknown.
Okay.
And the dangers that can be lurking beneath the surface of these seemingly idyllic communities.
Right. It's like there's this dark underbelly to the small town.
Exactly.
And a great example of this is The Town That Dreaded Sundown from 1976.
Oh, yeah. That one's based on a true story.
It is.
About these unsolved murders in Texas.
Yeah. And the film really uses the setting to create a sense of dread and paranoia.
You see how the murders just shatter the town's sense of security?
Right.
And how the fear of the unknown can tear a community apart?
It's like the town itself becomes a character.
Yes.
With its own secrets and dark history.
Absolutely.
And then when violence erupts, it disrupts that delicate balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And another film that uses this setting really well is Pontypool from 2008.
Okay.
You've seen that one?
I haven't, but I've heard it's really unique.
It's a zombie film.
Okay.
But the infection spreads through language.
Oh, wow.
It's so interesting.
That's creepy.
Yeah, and the whole film takes place in a small town radio station.
Oh, wow.
So it's very claustrophobic and isolated.
I love that concept.
It's really well done.
But it makes sense in a small town where gossip and rumors spread so quickly.
Exactly. And the film really plays with that idea, showing how language can be both a tool of communication and a weapon.
It's a chilling thought.
It is.
That even something as familial as language can be twisted into something terrifying.
Right. It makes you think about the power of words.
Yeah, it really does.
So we've talked about the creepy small town setting, but let's face it, we live in a digital age.
Right.
And our fears have evolved with technology.
Definitely.
Have our sources looked into how slashers are adapting to incorporate those anxieties?
They have, and it's really interesting.
Okay, tell me more.
So technology has changed not just our lives, but also the ways that horror filmmakers can tap into our fears.
Oh, for sure.
Think about it. Cyberstalking, online harassment, identity theft.
Deepfakes. It's endless.
It's endless, and these are real threats.
Absolutely.
And they're perfect for the slasher genre.
Right, because it's like our online lives can be just as vulnerable as our physical lives.
Exactly. And Unfriended from 2014 was one of the first films to really explore this.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
The whole movie takes place on a computer screen.
Right.
And it uses screen recordings, video chats, social media notifications to create this sense of immediacy and realism.
It's like you're watching something happening in real time.
Yeah, and it really tapped into that fear of being watched and not knowing who's behind the screen.
Exactly. And there have been other films that have used technology in a similar way.
Oh, like what?
Cam from 2018.
Okay.
It's about a cam girl who discovers that her online identity has been stolen.
Oh, wow.
And it uses webcam footage, online chat rooms.
The dark web.
So creepy.
It's all very unsettling and disorienting.
It's like the technology itself becomes a source of horror.
Yes, exactly. And what's interesting is that our sources suggest we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like imagine a slasher film set entirely in virtual reality, where the killer can manipulate the environment.
Or a film about an AI that becomes sentient and decides to eliminate its creators.
Oh, wow.
Stalking them through their smart devices and online accounts.
That's terrifying.
It really highlights how technology can make us feel vulnerable.
Yeah, it's like a whole new level of horror.
Right, and it shows how creative filmmakers can be.
Definitely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But let's step back in time now.
Okay.
And talk about historical and period slashers.
Yeah. Interesting.
Why don't we see more of those?
Yeah, it seems like there's so much potential there.
Right. Like imagine a slasher set in Victorian England.
Oh, with all the gothic atmosphere.
Yes.
And repressed desires.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the perfect setting for a psychological thriller with a slasher twist.
Absolutely. And there have been a few films that have ventured into this territory.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, one that we mentioned earlier is The Witch from 2015.
Oh, right.
Which is set in 17th century New England. And it uses that historical setting to create this really authentic atmosphere of paranoia and religious extremism. And the film's use of period-accurate dialogue costumes and set design really immerses you in that world.
Right. It's like you're transported back in time.
Exactly.
And it really captures the isolation and fear of the unknown that must have been so prevalent in those times.
For sure. Another good example is Bone Tomahawk from 2015.
Okay.
It's a Western horror film.
Okay.
About a group of men who have to rescue a captive from a tribe of cannibals.
Oh, wow.
It's brutal and incredibly tense.
It sounds intense.
It is, but it shows how effective a period setting can be.
Right. It adds a whole new dimension to the slasher genre.
For sure. And think about the possibilities.
Okay.
You could have a slasher set during the Black Death.
Oh, wow.
With the fear of disease and societal collapse.
Yeah.
Or a slasher set in ancient Rome. With gladiators and political intrigue.
The possibilities are endless. Okay, so for something a little lighter now, let's talk about those slasher films that embrace humor and self-awareness.
Fun.
The ones that poke fun at the genre's tropes while still delivering the
Oh,
scares.
I love those.
What do you think about those meta-slashers?
I think they're a lot of fun, and they show how the genre can be both entertaining and thought-provoking.
Uh-huh.
Like when a film can make you laugh and scream in equal measure, it's a really unique experience.
Right. It's like that nervous laughter you get when you're watching a scary movie with friends.
Exactly, and that's where the satirical or meta-slashers come in.
Okay.
They acknowledge the tropes and conventions, often making fun of them, but still giving you the thrills and chills.
It's like the filmmakers are winking at the audience,
Yeah.
saying, we know these horror tropes are kind of ridiculous, but let's have some fun with them.
And Scream from 1996 is the perfect example.
Oh, yeah, Scream is a classic.
It's so self-aware.
Right.
The characters are aware of the horror movie conventions,
Yeah.
and they try to use that knowledge to survive.
I love how it calls out those classic tropes, like the virginal final girl and the killer who always comes back from the dead.
It's both funny and scary at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what made Scream such a game changer for the genre.
For sure, it revitalized the slasher film.
What are some other meta-slashers that you think are worth mentioning?
Well, Tucker and Dale versus Evil from 2010 is a really fun one.
Oh, yeah, I love that movie.
It's hilarious.
It's so funny.
It flips the script on the hillbilly horror subgenre.
Right.
The supposed villains, Tucker and Dale, are actually these livable goofballs.
Yes.
Who are mistakenly targeted by a group of college students.
It's a classic misunderstanding.
It is, and the film is full of slapstick humor.
Oh, yeah.
But it also has this really sweet message about friendship and overcoming prejudice.
Ah, I love that.
And then there's The Final Girls from 2015,
Okay.
which follows a group of teenagers who are transported into a classic 1980s slasher film.
Oh, wow.
And they have to use their knowledge of horror tropes to survive.
So it's like a love letter to the slasher genre.
It is, with all the over-the-top violence and ridiculous plot twists.
I love that.
It's a really clever way to examine why we find these stories so compelling.
Right, even when we know they're not meant to be taken seriously.
Exactly.
So meta-slashers are like a way for horror fans to laugh at themselves in the genre they love.
While still getting their dose of scares.
Exactly. Okay, so let's shift gears again and talk about a setting that's often associated with crime thrillers and noir films, but can also be really effective in slashers, the urban environment.
Oh, interesting.
What do you think about the potential of urban horror?
I think it's really interesting, especially when you consider the anonymity and the social complexities of city life.
Right, it's like you're surrounded by people but still feel completely alone.
Yeah, and that creates this sense of unease and vulnerability.
It's the perfect breeding ground for fear and paranoia.
Absolutely. And our sources point out that urban settings can be used to explore a wide range of themes.
Like what?
Well, social inequality, urban decay, the dangers of technology, the breakdown of community.
Right, because cities can be both exciting and dangerous.
Exactly. And Candyman, which we talked about earlier, is a great example of urban horror done right.
Yes, it really shows how urban environments can become breeding grounds for both real and supernatural horrors.
And it highlights how urban legends can reflect the anxieties of a community.
Another film that comes to mind is Chopping Mall from 1986.
Oh, yeah, that one's more comedic.
Right, it's more fun and cheesy.
But it still uses the setting effectively.
Yeah, it takes place in a shopping mall after hours.
Right, a place that's familiar during the day but becomes eerie and menacing at night.
Exactly.
And it touches on our anxieties about technology and consumerism.
Which are often associated with urban life.
Right, so urban horror can range from the socially conscious to the purely entertaining.
It's a versatile setting.
It is.
Okay, so for our final theme in this section, let's get personal.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about family and interpersonal tensions as a source of horror. Why do you think these relationships are so effective at creating fear and suspense?
Because they tap into our most primal fears.
Like what?
Betrayal, abandonment, the
Yeah.
loss of loved ones.
Right.
Like, you're most vulnerable with the people you trust the most.
Yeah, that's true.
And when those relationships are twisted or broken, it can be terrifying.
It's like the people closest to us have the power to hurt us in ways that strangers can't.
Exactly. And that makes those relationships ripe for exploration in horror films.
So what are some slasher films that use family and interpersonal tensions really effectively?
Well, The Strangers from 2008 is a good example.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
It's a home invasion thriller
Uh-huh.
about a couple who are terrorized by 3 masked strangers.
And what makes it so effective?
It plays on our primal fears of vulnerability and the unknown.
Right.
The attackers have no clear motive.
It's just random violence.
Exactly, and that makes it all the more terrifying.
I remember that film. It's so unsettling.
It is.
Because it plays on those fears about the randomness of violence.
Right, and the fragility of our sense of safety.
It's like horror can strike anywhere at any time.
Exactly, even in the supposed safety of our own homes.
Another film that explores this is Hereditary from 2018.
Oh, that one's a slow burn.
It is?
But it's so well done.
What's it about?
It's about a family haunted by a dark secret from their past.
Oh, wow.
And it's masterful in its use of atmosphere tension and jump scares. But what really sets it apart is its exploration of grief, guilt, and the destructive nature of family secrets.
I've heard great things about that one.
It's really good. It gets under your skin.
It sounds like it.
And it shows how horror doesn't always have to come from external forces. It can come from within.
From the people we love.
Exactly.
From the secrets we keep.
From the bonds that tie us together.
And that's maybe the most terrifying thing of all.
It really is.
So even in a genre known for masked killers and violence,
right,
it's the human element that can make it truly terrifying.
The relationships, the emotional stakes.
Yeah.
Those are the things that elevate a slasher film.
I'm really starting to appreciate the depth and complexity of slasher films now.
Me too.
This has been so eye-opening.
I'm glad.
And I'm definitely going to be checking out some of these films.
Awesome.
But for now, let's take a break, and we'll come back to wrap up our deep dive into the world of underrated slasher themes.
Sounds good. So we were talking about family and those close relationships as a source of horror.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating theme because it really gets to the heart of what scares us.
Right, like those deep-seated fears of betrayal and abandonment.
Exactly. And the fact that the people we trust the most can hurt us in ways that strangers never could.
And our sources point out that there are some slasher films that really tap into that darkness within families.
Oh, okay, like what are some examples?
Well, The Strangers from 2008 is a really chilling one.
Oh, yeah, I remember that movie. It's so creepy.
It's a home invasion thriller about this couple who are terrorized by 3 masked strangers.
And what makes it so effective?
I think it's the way it plays on our primal fears of vulnerability and the unknown.
Right, like you're in your own home, a place where you should feel safe.
Exactly, and then suddenly you're not.
And the attackers have no clear motive.
Right, it's just random violence.
Which makes it all the more terrifying.
It's like anyone could be a target.
It really sticks with you.
It does,
yeah.
And it shows how horror can strike anywhere, even in the place where we should feel most secure.
Okay, so another film that explores the dark side of family dynamics is Hereditary from 2018.
Oh yeah, that one's a slow burn.
It is, but it's so well made.
What's it about? It's about this family that's haunted by a dark secret from their past.
Oh, wow.
And the film is amazing in its use of atmosphere, tension, and jump scares. But what really sets it apart is how it explores grief, guilt, and the destructive nature of family secrets.
I've heard such great things about Hereditary.
It's really good. It gets under your skin and stays with you.
It sounds like it.
And it shows that horror doesn't always have to come from some outside force. It can come from within, from the people we love, from the secrets we keep, from the bonds that tie us together.
And that's probably the most terrifying thing of all.
I think so.
So even in a genre that's known for masked killers and all that, it's those human elements, the relationships, the emotional stakes that can really elevate a slasher film.
Absolutely. They're the heart of the story.
I'm really starting to see slasher films in a whole new light now.
Me too.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
I'm glad you're enjoying it.
And I'm definitely going to be seeking out some of these films we've talked about.
Awesome. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But there's still more to explore.
Okay, what else do we have?
Well, let's talk about those slasher films that are both hilarious and terrifying.
Okay, wait. Can those two things really coexist?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And our sources actually suggest that this blend of humor and horror can make the viewing experience even better.
Really?
Yeah. Think about it. When a film can make you laugh and scream in equal measure, it's a really unique and memorable experience.
Yeah, that's true. It's like that feeling of nervous laughter when you're watching a scary movie with friends.
Exactly. You're not sure whether to be terrified or amused.
And that's where the satirical slashers or meta slashers come in.
Right. These are the films that playfully acknowledge the tropes and conventions of the genre.
Often poking fun at them.
Yeah. But they still deliver those thrills and chills.
So it's like the filmmakers are kind of winking at the audience, saying, we know these horror tropes are a bit ridiculous, but let's have some fun with them.
Exactly. And Scream from 1996 is a perfect example of how to do this well.
Oh, yeah. Scream is a classic.
It's full of self-aware humor. Like the characters know about all the horror movie conventions, and they try to use that knowledge to survive.
I love how Scream calls out those classic tropes.
Me too.
Like the virginal final girl.
Right.
And the killer who always comes back from the dead.
It's so ridiculous, but it works.
It does, and it's that combination of humor and horror that made Scream such a game changer.
For sure, it revitalized the slasher film.
Okay, so what are some other meta slashers that you think really nail that balance of funny and scary?
Well, Tucker and Dale versus Evil from 2010 is a really fun one.
Oh my gosh, I love that movie.
It's so good.
It's hilarious.
It's a really clever take on the hillbilly horror subgenre.
Right.
So the supposed villains, Tucker and Dale, are actually these lovable goofballs.
Yes.
Who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And they're mistakenly targeted by a group of college students.
It's a classic misunderstanding.
It is, and the film is full of slapstick humor.
Oh yeah, so much physical comedy.
But it also has this surprisingly sweet message about friendship and overcoming prejudice.
It does. It's a feel-good horror movie.
If there is such a thing.
And then there's The Final Girls from 2015.
Okay, I haven't seen that one.
Oh, it's so good. It follows a group of teenagers who are transported into a classic 1980s slasher film.
Oh, wow.
And they have to use their knowledge of horror tropes to survive.
So it's like a love letter to the slasher genre.
Exactly, with all the over-the-top violence and ridiculous plot twists.
I love that concept.
It's really well done, and it's a clever way to examine why we find these stories so compelling.
Right, even when we know they're not meant to be taken seriously.
Exactly. So meta-slashers are a way for horror fans to kind of laugh at themselves.
Yeah, and the genre they love.
But still get those scares.
It's the best of both worlds.
It is. Okay, so let's shift gears again and talk about a setting that's often overlooked in slasher films.
Okay, what is it?
The urban environment.
Interesting. What do you think about the potential of urban horror? I think it's a really fascinating setting, especially because of the anonymity of city life.
Right, you're surrounded by people, but you can still feel completely alone.
Exactly, and there's this constant sense of unease.
Like anything could happen.
Right, and you never know who to trust.
And our sources point out that urban settings are great for exploring a lot of different themes.
Like what?
Well, social inequality, urban decay, the dangers of technology, the breakdown of community.
It's like the city itself becomes a character.
It does, with all its complexities and contradictions.
Yeah. And one film that really captures that urban horror vibe is Candyman from 1992.
Oh yeah, that's a great example.
It uses the backdrop of the Cabrini Green housing project in Chicago.
Right, to explore those themes of poverty and violence.
And it shows how urban legends can reflect the anxieties of a community.
It's a powerful and disturbing film.
It is. Another one that comes to mind is Chopping Mall from 1986.
Oh yeah, that one's a lot lighter.
It is. It's more fun and cheesy.
But it still uses the setting effectively.
Yeah. Right. It takes place in a shopping mall after hours.
A place that's familiar during the day, but becomes eerie and menacing at night.
It plays on our fears of consumerism and technology,
which are so prevalent in urban life.
So urban horror can range from the socially conscious to the purely entertaining.
Exactly. It's a versatile setting.
Okay, well, this deep dive has been absolutely fascinating.
I'm glad you're enjoying it.
I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for the slasher genre now.
That's great to hear.
And I'm definitely going to be checking out some of the films we've discussed.
Awesome. Well, remember, the slasher genre is constantly evolving.
It is.
Finding new ways to tap into our fears and anxieties.
So there's always something new to discover.
Exactly. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep watching those slasher films.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll be back here on the Deep Dive.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Discussing your groundbreaking slasher film that pushes the boundaries of the genre.
I like the sound of that.
A film that leaves audiences both terrified and thoroughly entertained.
The ultimate goal.
Until then, thanks for joining us.
Okay, so last time we were talking about urban horror and how those settings can be so effective.
Yeah, like cities can be both exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Right. There's that anonymity and that sense of unease that can be really unsettling.
And our sources mentioned how urban horror can explore a lot of different themes.
Oh, yeah, like social inequality, urban decay, the dangers of technology.
It's like the city itself becomes a character.
It really does, with all its complexities and contradictions.
And one film that comes to mind is Candyman.
Oh, Candyman is such a great example of urban horror done right.
It uses the backdrop of the Cabrini Green housing project in Chicago to explore those themes of poverty and violence.
And it shows how urban legends can reflect the anxieties of a community.
It's a powerful film.
Is for sure.
Another one that I thought of is Chopping Mall from 1986.
Oh, yeah. That one's a lot lighter.
It is. It's more fun and cheesy, but it still uses the setting really well.
Right. It takes place in a shopping mall after hours.
Exactly. A place that's familiar during the day, but becomes totally different at night.
It plays on our fears of consumerism and technology, too.
Which are so connected to urban life.
So urban horror can really run the gamut from socially conscious to just pure entertainment.
It's a versatile setting, for sure. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different things today.
We have.
But I think it's clear that there's so much more to slasher films.
Yeah, than people often give them credit for.
Exactly. They're not just about mindless violence.
Right. They can be really thought-provoking and complex.
They can explore our deepest fears and anxieties.
And reflect our social and cultural concerns.
Exactly. And they can even make us laugh.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have, and this has been such a fascinating deep dive.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for the slasher genre now.
That's great to hear.
And I'm definitely going to be checking out some of the films we discussed.
Awesome. Well, I encourage everyone listening to do the same.
Yeah, go explore the world of slashers and see what hidden gems you can find.
And you never know. Maybe you'll be inspired to make your own slasher film someday.
Ooh, that's a great idea. A film that scares us, makes us think, and maybe even makes us laugh a little bit.
The ultimate slasher film.
I love it. Well, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.